Welcome to the All Hoops podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, producer to the stars, Chris Brito. The Boston Celtics are NBA champions for the 18th time in NBA history. Chris and I are going to break down how it happened, should they be the favorites again next year, where Dallas goes from here, and so much more. Chris, before we get to all that, how are you?
Hey Stevie, happy to be here on the All Hoops podcast to talk about not happy to talk about the Celtics winning championship number 18, but they fully deserve that title. They were the best team in the NBA all season long, and we were one of them, but nobody really tried to give them the credit they deserve, but they kept proving people wrong, or at least proving them right in that they are as good as they are. And here they are, NBA champions for the 18th time. Jason Tatum won his first championship, and so Jaylen Brown. They were two wings that many people thought that they couldn't coexist together. Um, and now Jaylen Brown's the MVP. And, he was someone that was criticized the last few postseasons for not having a left hand dribble. He seemingly corrected that and became the best player in the Eastern Conference finals and then the finals. My one big takeaway, besides all the things I just said, is that how incredible was Brad Stevens? I mean, if there was a way to give an executive an MVP award, I would give it to him. I thought the signing of Drew Holiday was probably the most important one out of all the things that he did, really, beyond locking in Jason and Jaylen Brown. Oh, eventually Jason Tatum, is that he brought in Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday, to me, was essentially the piece that won them the championship. He had the experience, he had the level-headedness that a lot of these young guys needed. He is the major difference between last few years of the team and this year's team. And while Porzingis was a great addition, he barely played these playoffs. But Drew Holiday was there all for all of it. And so to me, that was the biggest difference, and that bring him to Boston was the biggest thing that, you know, Brad Stevens could have done.
Yeah,
So
it felt like in the last few years with Tatum and Brown, it was kind of your turn, my turn a little bit, where they are both elite players. They were elite players before this year, but it was hard for the two of them to get the best out of each other. And we kind of said it for years. Really, what they needed was not to trade one of those guys or to learn how to play together better. It was more just bringing a point guard who could, solve these issues, who can help put everybody in the spots they need to be to succeed. And I kind of thought that guy was an older Chris Paul. I mean, maybe not this old Chris Paul, but maybe Chris Paul 3 years ago. And they bring in Drew Holiday, which maybe the Bucks kind of helped the Celtics win a championship here with this Drew Holiday trade, right? They jettison him to Portland, where anybody can go get him. Nobody's really offering significant assets. He goes from Portland to Boston and for basically a couple of picks and Malcolm Brogdon, who the Celtics were very interested in trading away earlier in the offseason. And he didn't, what was it? He didn't even pass a physical. So they get Drew Holiday on a very cheap trade. They extend Drew Holiday, and he helps facilitate an NBA championship.
yeah, it's incredible. And hats off to Boston. I don't like saying that, so but all credit goes to that front office and the players that made it happen. Now, are they a team that you can see repeating? I think they could. I am curious to see how they match up with a healthy Bucks team, healthy Sixers team, and a healthy Knicks team. But they have their two most important pieces are young, so they will always be in the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's kind of it. They remind me a lot of the early run of the Warriors in that they have a not a super team, not the Durant teams, the other Warrior teams, right? But they had arguably the best team going into every year, and the question kind of became this roster is going to and is already so expensive that will ownership be willing to pay an extra 200 million? Will they be paying an extra 300 million in a luxury tax bill the way the Warriors did? And a lot of teams they don't really put themselves in a position to even have to be asked that question. They make sure this doesn't happen. But with the way, the cap is, you have two all NBA guys in Brown and Tatum. Brown got his money last year. He's going to be making, 60 plus million towards the end of his current deal. Tatum's going to be on the same contract in a couple of weeks. That's not that it's scary. You're willing to pay those guys, but it becomes a scary payroll number. They locked up Drew Holiday long term. They locked up Kristaps Porzingis long term. So you have those four guys making a ton of money, right? And then at the same time, do you give Derek White an extension? He's at 19 million next year. Then he's a free agent. His 19 million a year. Obviously, he's worth 19 million a year. He's worth probably 30 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
But 30 million a year on a team way over the tax is more like 60, 70 million a year. Is that something where ownership's going to be able to stomach that? If you ask them right now, they would say absolutely. But we'll see. What if they fall short in the playoffs again? Things can go south pretty quick just based on the payroll, right? But as of right now, they should be the favorites next year. They have a great team. All these guys are coming back next year. It's more just what happens after that. We'll see. But when they gave Jaylen Brown the money and you knew Jason Tatum was next, this always felt like a 2-year run minimum. This will be now going into year 2. So I think they should be the favorites. I don't think the Knicks, Sixers, and Bucks are really in the same class as them at this very moment. Obviously, Philly is going to look to upgrade. They're going to look to bring in a wing like Paul George. Can the Knicks get healthy and show that what they did last year was legit? Can Randall come in and help them be better? Then maybe they could be in the same class, right? And then the Bucks, I'm not buying in here. I think Dame's on the way down. Giannis has been hurt the last couple of years. Chris Middleton is just old now, and they have nothing else behind those three. So I don't think the Bucks are really in that championship window anymore, bearing some kind of trade or signing we're not expecting. I think Philly, the Knicks, those are the two biggest threats in the East to Boston for sure. But we'll see. And then we're not giving the Pacers any credit, right? But we'll get to them later.
Yeah, I sort of disagree. I mean, whatever. Doesn't matter. I mean, the Celtics are like empirically in a separate class. They won a championship. All the three, the Celtics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right now they are. Like they are in a class of their own.
Yeah.
That being said, maybe I'm delusional, but I still think that the Knicks could have given them a run for their money if they were healthy. But listen, this will be an off season of hypotheticals in which we are going to feed ourselves until basketball begins again. So moving on real quick, just to talk about the Dallas Mavericks real quick. Luka Doncic, what we both know, he's an incredible player. But there was something to, we'll talk about Kyrie in a second, but it was something about him, like sort of like the amount of complaining that he did in some of the pivotal games, like game 3 and game 2, where you sort of saw that, his sort of like demeanor was sort of looked like a nuisance.
But Chris, he's always like that.
He is always like that. But I think that on a big stage, I think you should probably like spend less energy doing that and more like getting back on defense. And like I'm picking on Luka, not because listen, the Mavericks wouldn't even sniff the finals if it weren't for him. Let me put that out there. But the finals are a different game. He didn't get much help from his supporting cast. Kyrie was awful in every game in Boston. I don't really know how you improve that roster. That being said, I still think that they could be contenders. I think when you have a top 5 player, you're always going to be in the conversation. But the Western Conference is going to get more difficult. It's not going to be easier for Luka to return to the NBA Finals.
I do not blame Luka for this at all. I think this is what he is. He complains, and he's a incredible basketball player. He's one of, as you said, he's a top 5 player, the top 5 talent. He averaged in this series over 29 points a game, 9 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and over 47% from the floor. He was fantastic. He was brilliant. But the idea is they were not good around him. And he gets blamed for that. And to me, that's what happened to LeBron when he would fall short in the playoffs before he won his first ring. I don't think it's fair. Should he be complaining as much as he does? No. And it's really kind of annoying to watch. But at the same time, where was this chatter in the Oklahoma City series? I promise you this. He was cursing out refs there too. Where was this during the Clipper series when, it is what it is. The bottom line is he had no help. He had no help at all. We talked about before the series that Kyrie Irving bet, right? Over 20 points in every game and Dallas wins. I'm glad I didn't get on that with you. He averaged under 20 points for the series, Kyrie, 19.8. He was 41% from the floor. He was, as you just brought up, he was horrible in Boston. And for that to be your sidekick, it's just not good enough. To me, the number one reason they lost is Kyrie Irving. And the number 2 reason they lost is because the role players who all caught fire in the Oklahoma City series and before that,
And
the PJ Washingtons of the world, Gafford, Lively, none of those guys really hit shots. They couldn't hit threes. They couldn't really match the intensity of, getting back on defense, as you said. I don't think their defense was horrible, but at the same time, it certainly wasn't good, and their offense was worse. And so I wonder if they just ran out of steam. I don't think this team was a finals contender going into the playoffs. I don't know if they're a finals contender now. They might have just caught fire for a week, and Minnesota had never been there before. Oklahoma City had never been there before. The Clippers didn't have Kawhi, and they may never have Kawhi. So while Dallas could get back to the finals, I think the circumstances they used to get there were a little fluky. I wouldn't pick them next year unless obviously they make a big trade, but they don't have really any draft picks after trading them for PJ Washington and Gafford, 2 guys who really did help them, by the way, just to be clear. But this is kind of their group. And so if they can't really improve the team significantly, unless they hit on some draft pick we're not seeing, and their draft pick this year goes to the Knicks, how can this team improve themselves to get better? Because I can't really see Luka going from 38-8 to 40-12-12 and saying he's going to carry you by himself.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't really know how the Mavericks are going to improve. I just know that the Mavericks need to act quick in terms of building around Luka. You don't want to waste that man's talent. I still think you need to rein him in a little bit, but I think I mostly agree with what you said about he had no supporting help. He didn't.
Right. And I think, you picked Dallas, I picked the Celtics in 7. We both agreed that this was going to be a more competitive series. And
That was the most disappointing part about this whole
they
thing.
weren't, it wasn't like they were, the Minnesota series with Dallas, they were close games. They were buzzer beaters. This was a very, very competitive series that could have went either way. There was no mistake. Boston was the better team. They blew them out in 3 or 4 of the 4 wins. And the only time Dallas really looked energized or ready to go at all was the game the Celtics kind of mailed in Game 4, where now people are kind of questioning it was so bad. Did they just want to win at home? Which I think is nonsense. They don't want to play more games. But at the same time, that was the only game Dallas was even in. And they won by 40 million. So we'll see. I think that was the biggest surprise of the finals. That it wasn't a competitive finals. It wasn't a memorable finals. Give the Celtics some credit. They deserve it. Give the Mavericks some credit for getting to the finals. That's a pretty big accomplishment on Luka's resume, right? But at the same time, I don't think this will be the finals that we'll be talking about 5 years from now.
Definitely the most forgettable. I mean, I thought last year's finals were forgettable. This one was even worse.
This one was worse, for sure. All right, Chris, let's get to our final thoughts here. Obviously, with the finals kind of being a dud, the thing we were looking forward to, free agency, the draft, these things are next on the horizon. We're going to be all over it here on the All Hoop podcast. There's a new rule this year, which I know Chris, where teams can basically negotiate new contracts with their current guys before July 1st. They can basically start starting Tuesday throughout. And so you're already seeing one of the big dominoes potentially falling, where Woj is reporting Pascal Siakam intends to sign a new 4-year, about $189.5 million extension with the Pacers. He can't officially sign it until the league moratorium ends on July 6th, but we thought he was going to stay there. We thought he was going to get a max, and it looks like that's happened.
Yeah, and good for Pascal Siakam. I think he was so pivotal in that series against the Knicks. And, you know, the Pacers couldn't really do any damage against the Celtics, but, Siakam, I think, is well worth that money. And good for him.
Agreed, totally. And I think they're going to be, whether you think they're title contenders or not, they're still a pesky team that can run up and down the floor. And if you don't play a certain style, you're going to lose to them, as we saw a bunch of teams did. Okay, moving on. More ESPN reports. The Detroit Pistons have dismissed Monty Williams after 1 year at the helm. It was a disastrous year where they flirted with having the worst record of all time. They had almost had the worst losing streak of all time, right? And then he's still got 5 years and $65 million left on his deal. And so they hired a new president. He wanted his own guy. I'm still pretty surprised that Detroit is going to pay Monty Williams $65 million to go away. You, me, and our buddy Justin had some debates early in the year where I was like, it doesn't really make sense that he's not playing Ivy. They have really no incentive other than playing young players and seeing who's good. And I think it looks like the front office might have agreed.
Here, I think you need it. I think that, if you're a coach, you want your younger players to get the satisfaction of earning their minutes. I see obviously I see your point of playing the young guys because you have no other purpose. But I think that was what you're talking about with the Ivy thing. That was like early on in the season.
He did play a lot more as the year went on, to be fair.
Right.
It's not like he was benched the entire year.
Right.
And when they started that losing streak, he was playing 20 minutes a game. He was a lot coming off the bench. It didn't make any sense to me.
I still think it's kind of odd that they didn't at least give him another year.
Me too.
I think it's always worth establishing continuity with a roster and with a coach. I'm not trying to say that, this is what the Knicks did, but there's something to like getting better in a system as opposed to installing a new system every year. Like you're essentially having like a new philosophy on these young players that they have to learn again.
It just came down to me of they have a new GM, like new president, and he wanted his own guy. The last thing he wanted was to be fighting with Monty Williams about how many minutes Marcus Sasser should play or how many minutes their 5th overall pick this year should play. And so I think he just wanted a new guy who's going to focus on player development.
Yeah, that's valid.
I think they just mistook how close they were to being a playoff team last year when they hired Monty Williams. I think they thought he was the missing piece to get them into the playoffs. And they look like they're basically starting over right now. And maybe it's better that they figured that out now than in 2 years. But at the same time, it's still looking like a really long rebuild in Detroit.
Agreed.
All right, Chris, your guy JJ Redick now looks like the favorite for the Laker job. What do you think about that?
I like it for JJ. I just wish that he didn't have a podcast with LeBron before it. That being said,
that's getting him the job. You know that, right? Like, that's clearly getting him the job.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I think the number one requisite for any LeBron coach is for you to get along with LeBron and for LeBron to respect you. It seems like JJ Redick checks both those boxes. I just worry that it's a little short-sighted in that, like, okay, what happens after LeBron? Is JJ still going to be, I mean, they'll probably get a new coach at that point. But how does JJ potentially handle the fact that maybe the Lakers could sign LeBron's son and then have to deal with the minutes restriction and not minutes restrictions, but the minutes, the awkwardness between another grown man coaching your son I don't know. Maybe that's looking too far down the line, but it,
I just don't get it because JJ is one of the smarter basketball people in the media we have. He's one of the better basketball people in the media we have. I'm sure he's making decent money doing that. And obviously, coaching a prestige team has a lot of merits, right? That's the reason he's doing it. He wants to coach a all-time team. But at the same time, he's not in control there. It's LeBron. They really have no way to improve the roster. Like they
yeah,
have very
like
few draft picks. The draft picks they have are probably it's probably going to be used on Bronny James. You got to play Bronny James, or LeBron's going to be upset. LeBron might leave anyway. LeBron might retire in the next 2-3 years anyway. And so you really have very little
yeah.
control. And if it doesn't work out like we expect it's not going to work out, it's not LeBron's fault. It's your fault. And so that's why I don't really get why this is the job he wants to leave for. I get it's a prestige franchise, but it's been chaotic. They've fired many coaches. Frank Vogel won a championship, and he was with this same roster, and he was fired. And then they brought in
So
multiple guys since.
so the irony with JJ Redick potentially being hired, or it's looking like that way, is that he would have, I feel like he would have been a better fit in a younger team where he could have really molded the way that he would have wanted. That being said, we'll see, but I'm not confident that it's going to make a difference no matter who's coaching there. Uh, and then finally, the last thing I wanted to bring up, something to keep an eye out for, since we're technically like we're entering free agency and whatnot. The situation with OG Anunoby is going to be one to watch for Knicks fans. The Knicks really need to sign him. OG's people know this, and so any insinuation of a low ball could really hurt the Knicks' chances to re-sign him. So that's something to keep in mind as we continue on the free agency season. Um, I'm confident the Knicks will sign him at whatever the price tag is, but for a guy who's always injured, for a guy who, you know, he provides a lot of intangibles, is a defensive ace that we needed, but is he gonna be enough to be a third guy? We'll see.
He's enough to be a third guy if he's out there, but we just don't know if he will be. And now going into the next contract's going to take him into his 30s. Is he going to be more healthy then? It's kind of a similar situation with Kawhi where it's like, oh, well, this year he'll be good. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why do the numbers have the games played have showed you that this is not a reliable player for more than 5 years now. And the number one cause of injuries is previous injuries. That's just it. And so does that mean they shouldn't sign him? No, like they should definitely sign him. And I just didn't like the trade at the time because you knew you were going to be in this position. This is one of the worst free agent classes we'll ever see. We already saw Pascal Siakam sign, right? OG might be the best free agent out there. And so if you're Philly or you're, New Orleans or you're the Kings, like, why wouldn't you throw all the money you can at OG Anunoby, hope he's healthy, and see if you could pry him away? He does not have bird rights here, which means the Knicks can't really match any deal. They're going to have to just blindly hope that, one, they give him the number he's okay with, and two, that it's not a crippling decision for them. Because if he's hurt, there's no way to replace him. You're going to be way over the cap, and you got to do it. You're kind of in a tough position, but I think the number is going to be 35 million. My guess is he's asking for 40, which is like the full max, and they're offering 30. And so we'll see how that plays out. But I think it will get done, as you said. It's just going to be very nerve-wracking because the Knicks desperately need OG, and OG can get his money virtually anywhere. And because he can just fit so many teams. I mean, yes, obviously he's been hurt, but he's a guy who is, I think, improving on offense. He looked great shooting the ball this year. Obviously, he's that defensive ace you need. And he does so many things on the court. And he, to me, is that third guy on a championship team. I just don't know if he's going to play enough to show that.
Fair enough. Let's hope the Knicks do the right thing.
Yes, and I think they will. I think they're going to get it done. I think they're going to bring him back. We'll see about Isaiah Hartenstein. We're going to talk about all of that in the next couple episodes with NBA free agency starting on June 30th. Obviously, again, as we said, teams can re-sign their own guys. Do I think OG is going to sign before then? No, I don't. I think he's going to hit free agency and talk to a couple of teams. It's going to be a very nerve-wracking couple of days for Knicks fans. But at the same time, I do think he will come back. So we will talk about that in our next couple of shows. We have the NBA draft next week. Chris, finals are over, but we're just getting started here. It's going to be a great couple of weeks. So thank you to you. Thank you to our watchers on YouTube, our listeners on Spotify and Apple. We'll be back next week to talk about more NBA action.
Bye, everyone. And thank you, Steve.